Let us pray. Our Father, we ask for your strength and encouragement in our service of you through our service of others. We humbly ask for your gift of wisdom to guide us in making good laws and good decisions for the present and the future of Alberta. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills. Tabling returns and reports. Introduction of special guests.
Mr. Speaker, it's my privilege and pleasure to introduce to you and through you to the members of this Assembly 33 students from grade 5 and grade 6 at the Fort Vermilion School, and they are accompanied by 3 teachers, Mr. Lou Brocha, Mr. Hino Pringnitz, and Ms. Pam Pledwell, 3 parents, Mrs. Agnes Isaac, Mr. Peter Ains, bus driver, and Mr. Brian Fletcher, bus driver. And I might point out, Mr. Speaker, these young students had the privilege of meeting the Minister of Education and I when we were there for the official opening of their facility at Fort Vermilion. And I might also point out while I'm on my feet, Mr. Speaker, that Fort Vermilion is the first community in Alberta that will be celebrating its bicentennial in 1988. I would ask them to rise and receive the warm welcome of this Assembly.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to introduce to the Assembly 16 students from grade 6 at Lendham School. They haven't come as far as my colleagues' class did, but they have the class. And I'd like them to stand when I introduce the 2 teachers, Mrs. Gibbard and Ms. Gland. And I'd like the class and teachers to stand now.
Minister of Culture.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased today to introduce to you and to members of the Assembly 8 leaders of ethnocultural organizations in the province of Alberta. They are Mrs. Burley, President of the Black Women's Association of Alberta, Mr. Stribny, President of the Czechoslovak Association of Canada, Edmonton Chapter, Mr. Kular, President of the Hindu Society of Alberta, Mr. Alan Hoyano, President of the Edmonton Japanese Community Association, Mrs. Betty Broen, President of the Sons of Norway Lodge 143, Mr. Tan, President of the Malaysian Singaporean Friendship Association, Mr. Frank Zimrim, President of the Slovenian Canadian Association of Edmonton. They're in the members' gallery, and I'd ask them to stand and receive the warm welcome and thanks of the Assembly for their work in Alberta.
Member for Edmonton Meadowlark.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure to introduce to you today and to the members of the Legislative Assembly 48 grade 5 and 6 students from Collingwood School. They are accompanied today by 2 teachers, Mr. Frizzell and Mrs. Johnson. I would ask them to stand and be recognized by the members of the Legislature.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct the first question to the Minister of Hospitals and Medicare. Mr. Speaker, present funding arrangements allow the University of Alberta Hospital to do between 600 and 625 open heart surgeries operations annually. At the present time, Mr. Speaker, there are approximately 260 persons waiting for open heart surgery, which translates to a wait of approximately 6 months. My question to the minister is, what action has the minister decided to take in order to reduce the wait for heart surgery in Edmonton?
Mr. Speaker, we have not taken any specific action, except to say that there is capacity in the City of Calgary at the Holy Cross Hospital for persons who may wish to go there to be able to receive open heart surgery somewhat quicker than they would at the University Hospital in Edmonton. The program in Edmonton is an excellent one, even though there are a number on the waiting list. I'm not aware that that has created the kind of problems that were cited last weekend with respect to people actually not making it to their operation because of their heart problem. But that, again, is something that I've asked the president of the hospital and the executive director to look into, the allegations that there are people dying because they have not been able to obtain heart surgery.
Supplementary question following from the minister's answer. Of course, he was talking about Dr. Armstrong raising it at the convention in Calgary. My question is to the minister. Is the minister then saying that he does not believe that Dr. Armstrong is correct and that a 6-month waiting list could not result in problems and possible death? Is that what the minister is saying?
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition wasn't listening to what I said. I said that I've asked the President of the hospital and the Executive Director of the University Hospital to inquire into those allegations to see to the extent, Mr. Speaker, at which they are factual, and to advise me of what the situation really is. And until they've had an opportunity, which may take several days, I don't know, to do that, I'm not at liberty to comment whether or not those statements are accurate or not.
Supplementary question. I think it wouldn't take much investigation to find out that there is a 6-month waiting list. I think all of us know that that could create problems. But to add to this, Mr. Minister, would he advise what effect the 3% cut in hospital funding will have on the length of wait for heart surgery? It's 6 months now. Will it be 9 months, a year and a half, or what will happen?
Well, first of all, the honourable member should remember that the allegations that were made over the weekend were not with respect to the waiting period, but rather to the fact that deaths were occurring 1 every 5 weeks, I believe was the exact quote, because of the waiting period. There's a considerable difference between that statement and the fact that there may indeed be a waiting list. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition, I hope, would recognize the difference between those two statements. With respect to the heart program at the University Hospital, I think it's fair to say that the board of the hospital and the senior administration and indeed senior surgeons at the hospital have done everything that they can in readjusting their budget to ensure that the major role of the University Hospital in terms of the care of sick people, Mr. Speaker, is carried forward without any reduction in terms of patient care. I would not expect the waiting list to grow any longer. As a matter of fact, I'm hopeful that over the coming year that the University Hospital can in fact do even more open heart surgery operations than they might have in the previous year. We don't know that that's the case for sure, but certainly the capability is there within the dollars that are allocated to the University Hospital. It's the highest dollars of any hospital in Alberta by far, and indeed stacks up well with any hospital in Canada. We're hopeful that within those dollars the University Hospital can find a way to place a priority on even reducing that waiting list from what it presently is.
Well, hope, Mr. Speaker. It seems to me that to the minister that if there's a longer waiting list, especially with elderly patients, then we're putting them at risk, and it's going to result in deaths. But a positive suggestion here to this minister. I notice the government of Alberta has become one of the largest advertisers in the country, spending almost $10 million a year to enhance its image. Will the minister ask his colleagues to abandon image ad campaigns and put this $10 million into heart operations?
Mr. Speaker, I don't know what the Honourable Leader of the Opposition is talking about. I'm introducing an advertising campaign next week that will cost about $200,000 that will hopefully reduce some of the increases in the utilization of the healthcare system by people in our province using better health habits and using the system more judiciously than they do now. If he's talking about that, I'm perfectly prepared to defend that during my estimates or any other time. I should just say to the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, with respect to the heart program at the University Hospital, I was there at a heart symposium about 3 months ago, and I asked a doctor from a U.S. hospital in Boston what the waiting list was there for open heart surgery, and he said about as long as it takes to get your shirt open and to get $30,000 out of your back pocket.
Supplementary, Edmonton Gold Bar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Has the minister yet established the numbers of surgical beds in general that will close as a result of his cutbacks, the nature of the waiting lists? What kind of emergencies, Mr. Speaker, are we creating? We're not just dealing with existing emergencies, we're creating new ones. How about using the $110 million in lottery funds?
Mr. Speaker, I made the last remark to the Honourable Leader of the Opposition to indicate that where the cost is absolutely nothing. Indeed, there is often a waiting list where the cost is extremely high. There is none, and there are far more people going without open heart surgery in the United States than there is in Alberta. With respect to the question just posed, I've been in the hospital system quite a bit over the last 3 or 4 days even, and I have observed in more than one hospital that the hospitals are operating around the clock and 7 days a week now, and many hospitals where beds indeed have been selectively closed in a medical ward or in a surgery ward, that slack is being picked up by better utilization of the remaining beds and all of the remaining equipment throughout the hospital. I know that some of the surgeons are working very long hours to use all of the available equipment and facilities that are in the hospital that are open. It's my hope that most hospitals, certainly the major hospitals in this city, should finish the fiscal year that we're now starting in, having delivered a better quality of health care at 97% of last year's budget. I think they can do it, and the challenge by physicians and others in the system has been to do just that. I'm extremely proud of how well they're doing.
Supplementary question, Calgary Milliken.
The Honourable Minister, through the years, the usage of the hospitals have always dropped off in the months of June, July, and August. Will the Minister be attempting to work with the medical profession and the hospitals, perhaps to use some of the slack time, this drop-off of the usage of the beds during those months?
Well, some of the hospital boards have in fact suggested they're going to increase the number of beds that might not be utilized during that period of time because they believe that it's more cost-effective to be running 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, fully occupied than to have a situation where a lot of people aren't coming in because of, especially for elective surgery, because of holidays and other things. So I think it would be inappropriate for me to say to a hospital board, this is what you should do during those 2 months of the year. I think it's better for them to analyze in each individual hospital the opportunity they have for cost savings and continue, and at the same time continue with the level of patient care that we've become accustomed to. So short answer is I haven't. That's one of the options, of course, but I think hospital boards individually do a good job of looking at that.
Speaker, a supplementary question to the Minister of Health. Is the department giving any direction to moving some of the active care beds in the smaller hospitals and moving those into long-term and using those savings to make the active treatment hospitals more efficient and providing them with more funds?
Mr. Speaker, I just wrote a letter to all hospital board chairmen 2 or 3 weeks ago advising that we have developed a new policy within the Department of Hospitals and Medical Care that will allow for the conversion of existing active treatment beds to long-term care or auxiliary beds, particularly in smaller hospitals, with a view to converting no less than 5 and perhaps in some cases more than that, or the entire facility to extended care. And I should advise as well that there are 2 hospitals, small hospitals in the province, that have been approved for conversion from active beds to extended care beds in total, the latest one being at Galahad that we just approved during the budget process a couple of weeks ago. So there is a move amongst a lot of smaller hospitals to dedicating more of their medical resources to longer-term care, freeing up dollars in the active treatment system for the larger, more specialized hospitals, and that's a trend, I think, that is happening right across the province.
Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Hospitals and Medicare. Mr. Speaker, the Minister said yesterday that he was, first of all, unaware of cutbacks in the Cross Cancer Institute follow-up program for cancer patients. Then he said that this program had started over a year ago. However, Mr. Speaker, it is clear that since the 3% cuts were announced, this program has greatly accelerated, causing great concern among cancer patients. My question to the Minister, has the Minister checked, and is he now aware of the concern which has been caused among cancer patients who have received letters canceling appointments and informing them that they will no longer be treated at the Cross Cancer Institute?
Mr. Speaker, I had my office contact Dr. Neil MacDonald this morning, who's the director of the Cross Cancer Clinic. They had discussed this matter as well with him on yesterday. He advised that indeed the NDP and the media had called him this morning for the same information that I have here. And it's this. The follow-up program at the Cross Cancer Clinic has been reviewed consistently since the late 1970s to determine in what way the hospital might provide better opportunities for patients to have follow-up care in their own community-based institutions, sometimes many, many miles from the city of Edmonton. There was some acceleration in that program in November of 1986 because the hospital had again looked at their overall operating costs and decided that that was one area in which they could accelerate the number of patients who were being checked in other facilities. I just conclude, Mr. Speaker, by saying that the critical point is not how many people are served in terms of checkup in other institutions, but the nature of their checkup and their ability to have follow-up work done at the Cross. In January of March of 1986, there were 2,134 people enrolled in the Cross Cancer program for checkups on a monthly basis, and in March of 87 there were 2,188, which is some 50 more patients. So there hasn't been any dramatic reduction at all over that period of time. I presume that the honourable members got the exact same information.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. We'll certainly disagree with your figures because we're well aware of a lot of letters where people have been cut off unnecessarily as far as they're concerned, and I would like to table copies of letters from Mrs. E. Dinwoody, who states in part, a patient with recurring cancer as late as 1986 has been told to see her family physician and at the same time was given no options.
Order, Honourable Leader. There's a great difficulty with respect to Beauchene about tabling private letters, and especially unless permission has been given, that raises another issue. But please concede, carry on with the question.
Yes, and she says, Mr. Speaker, and permission has been given, that cancer patients and others needing medical care are prone to accept such a decision. My question is, then, will the minister undertake to investigate this situation and determine objectively whether a shortage of funding is behind this situation?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've already investigated the matter, and the facts are these. It is far more appropriate in terms of the expenditure of medical funds for the Cross Cancer Clinic to be advising patients to have checkups in their own communities, with their own doctors and their own community-based facilities, than to advise them to always come back to the cross-cancer clinic. One of the major complaints that citizens throughout this province have had over the years with the cross-cancer clinic is the cost of traveling to and from. If you travel from High Level or Valley View or Fort McMurray to the cross-cancer clinic in Edmonton, it's the cost of travel, the overnight stays, and so on, and all of us have experienced them with either family or friends. So we're trying very hard in the system to allow people to be treated as close as practically possible to their own home. In every case where a patient is asked to have checkups at their own community-based hospital, the patient receives a letter from the attending physician at the cross-cancer clinic saying that if any time they have any concern about that kind of follow-up, they're more than happy to bring them back to the cross-cancer clinic for a checkup and accommodate them there by appointment. So my investigation of the situation, Mr. Speaker, is that the cross-cancer clinic is doing an outstanding job of trying to match the requirement for patient care in that facility with the requirement, with the availability of patient care in other facilities throughout the province, while at the same time making sure our citizens aren't unnecessarily inconvenienced by having to travel long distances and stay in the city of Edmonton. Now, if the honourable member had ever lived outside the city and been exposed to those kinds of problems of leaving families at home and work and so on to come for an appointment here, he would understand the need for the program that is in place.
Supplementary. The minister's well aware they always had that option before.
That's right.
They didn't have to come to the cross clinic, but for many of them they thought it necessary even for their own state of mind. And my question is, following up with that, the clinic was forced to cancel follow-up appointments. We have the letters on that with cancer patients and refer them to family physicians. Now, does the minister not agree that cancer patients in Alberta should have access to fully qualified, trained medical staff, and that not all family practitioners can do this sort of cancer checkup?
Mr. Speaker, it may well be that patients always had the option of going to their own physician, but it wasn't a practice in years past that was always encouraged by the cross-cancer clinic. And what we now have is a program in place where there is contact between the family physician and the physicians at the cross-cancer clinic to make sure that if there's a critical area of need, indeed the patient can come back to the cross-cancer clinic. I can't for the life of me understand how you could have a better program, Mr. Speaker, than one of that nature. And I might add the Tom Baker Cancer Clinic in Calgary operates in a very similar way. Now, the Leader of the Opposition should be aware as well that we're trying, in addition to having these checkups done in their own community-based hospitals, we're trying to establish some limited treatment programs as well at satellite stations or satellite hospitals outside of the cross-cancer clinic in Edmonton and the Tom Baker Centre in Calgary. In fact, there has been one operating for many years in Lethbridge, and there's now some assistance available in Medicine Hat, and we're hoping to expand that program to Grand Prairie and Red Deer and probably Fort McMurray in due course. So the whole concept of medical care of cancer patients in the Cross Cancer Institute, both in Edmonton and Calgary, is one of trying to do the very critical things in that institution while at the same time freeing that institution up for those things and getting the checkups done by private physicians in other hospitals. And I'm proud and pleased that the board of the hospital, the administration, have worked so well to make this happen for our citizens.
It's frankly irrelevant. While you're proud or pleased, we're trying to get to the bottom of this matter. And it's not only people outside of Edmonton, there's people in Edmonton that are getting cut off. And my question is, because there is a great deal of distress, if the minister hasn't been getting this through his department, he better check with his staff. My question is, and will the minister at least, because of the concern expressed, agree to provide funding for the Cross Cancer Institute to at least restore the existing, just the existing medical appointments for cancer patients which the Cross Institute has been forced to cancel so that cancer patients can be appraised of their medical situation in relation to the cutbacks firsthand rather than through a form letter.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition doesn't seem to understand what the approach is in this whole area. What I would like to be able to agree to do, if we can find enough dollars in our budget this year very, very soon, is to expand the programs at Grand Prairie, Fort McMurray, Red Deer, Medicine Hat in the community-based regional hospitals there, so that we can, first of all, do some additional training with respect to people who will provide treatment in those centers, but provide the facilities and the equipment as well. The real challenge is to do that, not to create a situation where we actually go backwards by saying to people who found a way to get checkups in their own communities and making sure they can come back to the Cross Cancer by saying they should now all come back to Edmonton and we'll provide more dollars to do the same thing here that they can get done in Grand Prairie or Red Deer or perhaps many other community hospitals. So, Mr. Speaker, I just conclude by saying we want to go forward with medical care in Alberta, not backward, and I think the Cross Cancer Clinic indeed is going forward.
Edmonton Goldbar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The minister seems totally confident in this, more confident than perhaps those that we're hearing from. Is the minister telling us that Dr. MacDonald of the Cross Institute is totally convinced that not only have the numbers being treated outside the institution maintained, but that the quality of the outreach care has been maintained as well in this reduced cost method?
Mr. Speaker, occasionally I'm guilty, as are members, of mixing up the word treatment and checkups for certain reoccurrences, and the checkups that are being done should probably not be confused with treatments, and the treatments, as I understand it, are only being done at Lethbridge at the present time, perhaps to a limited extent in Medicine Hat, and that's the program we'd like to expand to other regional hospitals. But I'm confident from my information about what the Cross Cancer Clinic is doing that if there is any danger or problem at all with respect to the checkups that are being done outside the Cross Cancer Clinic by other physicians in other hospitals, they would quickly have those patients return to the Cross Cancer Clinic. I think the whole scope and idea of treatment of cancer patients is one of moving away from dedicated facilities for a certain amount of the work. So I hope that the hospital is confident that is working. They've given me every indication it is.
Main question, member for Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to put this question to the Minister of Agriculture. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Larry Whaley, the borrower's advocate, has determined that many Alberta farmers have been overcharged thousands of dollars or tens of thousands of dollars in interest by the banks through the last number of years. The Minister of Agriculture, too, of course, has indicated, Mr. Speaker, that he is willing to assist these farmers in checking out the claims and pursuing that. Mr. Speaker, my question is the minister aware of any cases in Alberta where a farmer has successfully recovered the interest costs without that, or did not involve a court challenge with the attendant high legal fees?
Mr. Speaker, as I did indicate when I was contacted by, I believe, somebody from the Edmonton Sun, we're more than happy to make inquiries on behalf of farmers who feel that they have been treated unjustly. To my knowledge, there's only been one case in the province of Alberta, but I stand to be corrected on that also, and I should point out that it's only alleged by Mr. Whaley that this has taken place. If there is concrete proof, we're more than happy to make representation on behalf of the individual farmers concerned.
Mr. Speaker, then I'm just trying to determine how this help to the farmer will take place. I would acknowledge in the fact that many farmers who may have been overcharged by banks, cannot afford the legal costs of pursuing their cases. Will he consider assisting them with the costs of fighting the banks in the court?
Mr. Speaker, it's all rather hypothetical because, as I indicated to the honourable member for Westlock Sturgeon, that it's alleged. Until we do have something concrete to work from, it's rather difficult for me to commit myself.
Mr. Speaker, it's not hypothetical. you're sitting there as a farmer without very much coming in, and you feel you've been ripped off, and your government will not help you in any way. It's not hypothetical at all. Well, as the minister approached the banks to ensure that if the farmers want to recover or want to get some documents, that they will turn over those documents so that the farmers can determine and analyze, or have independent consultants analyze whether they've been overcharged.
Mr. Speaker, individuals from our office have been in contact with the banks, and the banks have indicated to me that they're more than happy to examine their records in the event that the farming population feels that they have been treated unjustly. I also understand that there might be some complications involved with that, because if we go beyond a certain number of years, they do not have it computerized, so it does involve a considerable amount of work, but they have indicated to me as best they can they are going to be obliging to making further inquiries for those farmers who feel that they have been treated unjustly.
Surely, Mr. Speaker, that's like asking the fox to check how many chickens are still in the hen house, but nevertheless, is the minister aware that there's very complicated calculations are involved in this and requires very specialized accounting and abilities? Would he go as far, Mr. Speaker, as to offer the services of some people in his depleted department, admittedly, to help them in calculating whether or not they have been
Overcharged.
gouged, shafted, or whatever you want to call it, by the banks?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as the honourable member should be aware, and I must say at the outset, I must say I am somewhat frustrated when the honourable member continues to judge others by his own low standards. And I will say to him in all fairness that the standards of others to date have been a great deal higher than his. But I want to indicate to him too that, as I indicated earlier, we're more than happy to make inquiries or representation on behalf of individual farmers. He is no doubtedly aware also that the banking legislation does fall under federal jurisdiction, and as best we can, we're more than happy to go to bat for our farming population, as we do consistently within this party.
Supplementary? Supplementary, Littlebaugh.
Supplementary question to the minister. Could the minister indicate in his investigations and discussions with the banks whether the major 6 banks have reduced the amount of finances or capital within their agricultural portfolios in Alberta, and specifically, or in a broader sense, Western Canada?
Mr. Speaker, those figures I don't have at my fingertips, but I will investigate and report back to the honourable member at an appropriate time.
Member for Vegreville.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the Associate Minister of Agriculture, I'm wondering if her department has done any investigation to determine whether or not there were loans made through the banks that were guaranteed through the ADC loan program that may have involved these overcharges to farmers.
Not that I know of, Mr. Speaker, but I'll take that question as notice.
Member for Littlebaugh, followed by the member for Old Stidsbury.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Premier. Yesterday, the Premier of Ontario visited us. Could the Premier indicate, and I raised the question yesterday, whether discussions following question period on the matter of the EEE Senate, and was there any indication at that time that the Ontario Premier would be prepared to give support for that concept being discussed at the upcoming First Minister's meeting in a few days?
Mr. Speaker, the Premier of Ontario, like myself, of course, is not the chairman of the upcoming conference on April the 30th. Nevertheless, we did have a good discussion about the concept of Senate reform and our belief that the most effective way would be the EEE Senate type of reform. The Premier of Ontario expressed his view that reform was necessary and timely, and that he would give very serious consideration to the matter of a EEE type, though he felt there were a variety of other options that should also be considered. But we did provide his government with details on the EEE Senate, and I noted that today in Ontario, reporting back, he said an elected Senate with equal representation from each province should be considered as a way to help curb a very strong sense of alienation in Western Canada, Ontario Premier Peterson said today. So he says while that has some concerns, nevertheless, he sees it as a constructive thing to take a look at.
Mr. Speaker, certainly that's some progress. Could the Premier also indicate whether the matter of gas, the concern with regards to gas being sold to Ontario was discussed? I've raised the questions earlier in question period. Was that matter discussed, and was there some resolution or some procedure worked out by which we could resolve this matter to the best of Ontario and Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, the point was discussed, and I made the case that it would be a very big mistake for the province of Ontario's purchasers of natural gas to concentrate on the one feature of low price. Because if they did that, they would not be protecting themselves in the longer run with security of supply. The Premier of Ontario accepted that that was a balance that should be struck, and that he, when he returned to his province, would be encouraging his various organizations, his various boards, to make sure that that was a consideration that they actively considered.
Mr. Speaker, the last supplementary I have is with regards to further coal sales. Could the Premier indicate whether that matter was discussed and that some increased agreements were obtained?
We did discuss the matter of additional coal sales. We have both participated now on the meeting, or at the meeting and the committee chaired by the Deputy Prime Minister, and Premier Van der Zalm is a participant, as is Premier Devine, on the matter of additional coal sales to Ontario. Our discussion yesterday was on the future needs of Ontario Hydro for coal for the production of electrical power, and also on the future needs of steel producers in Ontario, because they are using almost no metallurgical coal. And we are devising a strategy that would allow us to bring the benefits of using Alberta coal for the making of steel to the producers in Ontario.
Final supplementary.
Supplementary, I know I said final earlier, but could the Premier indicate whether discussions took place with regards to the inequalities between, say, Alberta, Western Canada, and some of the treatment of Ontario by the federal government? For example, the DREE program. Was there any discussion with regards to that? I know that makes the agenda very long, but it is a very crucial issue, I think, in the minds of Albertans and Western Canadians.
Mr. Speaker, we didn't deal with that specifically, but you can't talk about the impact of a Triple-E Senate without getting into the whole matter of balanced representation and balanced regional input to federal government programs. And so in that light, it came up. And he agreed with me that such a program of a Triple-E Senate would have been very effective in causing sober second thoughts or stopping completely such ill-devised schemes as the National Energy Program brought on by the parties represented, NDP and Liberals.
Member for Calgary, the supplementary question still on this issue. Calgary Buffalo.
Yes, to the Premier, we're obviously not going to get a Senate of the generosity of Central Canada, and the matter is apparently not even on the agenda. What firm steps and negotiating chips is the Premier prepared to use in order to assure the Albertans that the Senate initiative is not just another public relations exercise of the government?
Maybe I should use buffalo chips, Mr. Speaker. Frankly, Mr. Speaker, surely the honourable member would be clever enough to know that the most foolish thing to do in advance would be to express your negotiating position in advance of doing the actual negotiations.
Cypress Redcliffe supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to the Premier. I wonder if the subject of sale of oil and oil self-sufficiency came up in the meeting yesterday as well.
Yes, it did, Mr. Speaker, because we were talking about a whole range of energy matters. And one thing that we talked about was the need of Canada in the late 1980s and then early 1990s for additional supplies of oil, and under current circumstances that it appears that those supplies will have to come from foreign sources. We talked about the advantages that would accrue to Canada if we were able to commence additional developments of Alberta's oil sands. And to the extent that such a development might provide security supply for the people of Ontario, the Premier of Ontario advised that his government would give very serious consideration to assisting in financing of such a project.
Main question, Old Stidsbury, followed by the member for Edmonton Highlands.
My question has been answered, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Edmonton Highlands, followed by Edmonton Meadowlark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to direct my question today to the Minister of Social Services. I'm sure that the Minister is now aware of statistics which have recently been gathered, which indicate that there are about 1,200 homeless Edmontonians. I think this tragedy will doubtless grow as the effects of the cuts she has recently imposed on social allowance recipients transcends into hard reality for about 20,000 more Albertans. What plans has the Minister, if any, which will ensure that the people currently rendered homeless will have access to affordable shelter, that is, shelter that they can afford on the new low rates for shelter allowances given by her department?
Mr. Speaker, I would say for the honourable member's information, and particularly if she has potential clients contacting her office, that there have been vacancies, and they are still there in a significant number in the shelters in downtown Edmonton, both for women and men.
Oh, so they'll live in the shelters, will they? I understand that they have pretty strict time limitations, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the Minister is aware that even coupling up in apartments, which the Minister is constantly advocating, still, with two people in a one-bedroom apartment, would not be enough money to meet the average price of a one-bedroom apartment. I'd like to know, is the Minister recommending that 3 people share a one-bedroom apartment? If she is, will she supply a list of landlords prepared to rent one-bedroom apartments to 3 tenants?
Mr. Speaker, I responded to the first question because the honourable member had used the term homeless, and maybe the honourable member did mean something else, but in response to the honourable member's second question, my information now is that in many cases the landlords are dropping the price of their rent, which I think is interesting in and of itself.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think that is a good sign, because what happened is when the Minister imposed shelter allowance limitations, the landlords learned real fast to hike their rents to match that ceiling. So what I'd like to ask the Minister now then, I've seen the Municipal Affairs report on their plans for accommodating Alberta to the International Year for Shelter for the Homeless, and what I see is the possibility of 125 units maybe becoming available in 1988. Can the Minister explain what plan she has right now to accommodate those people who currently can't find accommodation, that is shelter, at the rates for which social allowance will pay?
Mr. Speaker, I would certainly challenge the honourable member's comments that there will be those numbers that would suddenly become homeless because of the shelter rate. There are many people living within the shelter allowance that is allowed, and I believe that will continue into the future.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. I was not saying 20,000 would become homeless. I was identifying 1,200 Edmontonians who have been identified by a coalition as being homeless right now. My final supplementary to the Minister then, when will the Minister start to work with the Minister responsible for housing so that we can actually get a comprehensive social housing policy developed, especially for the inner city, for those people who are sleeping in doorways, Mr. Speaker?
Mr. Speaker, if the honourable member knows of people speaking in doorways, I certainly hope that she'll direct them to shelter.
Edmonton Gold Bar, supplementary question.
A supplementary to the Minister. Is this then really the intent in dropping the shelter allowance to the Minister? That those who are joining the ranks of the single unemployed every day and considered unemployable by your department, that they are to spend their nights in shelters and their days on the street or else leave? Is that the intent of dropping the allowance?
Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry I missed one part of the honourable member's question. Did she say unemployable or employable?
I said, may I explain, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, I suggested they are unemployed and considered employable by your department.
Mr. Speaker, I think there has been, and the honourable member should be aware of the various programs that are available to people, both in terms of the programs that my honourable colleague, the Minister responsible for career development, has, as well as many significant community organizations. And I would say to the honourable member that those people will indeed be looked after.
Calgary Milliken.
Just on the same matter, Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the minister would consider putting out booklets or brochures directing these people to the Alberta Mortgage and Housing Corporation. Because in Calgary, I think there's a 30 to 35% vacancy rate in Murdoch Manor, and I think there's several other of the large apartment buildings. But have you considered directing them to those buildings? It's only 25% of your income, sir, if you check.
Mr. Speaker, the social workers are well aware of the number of shelter options that are available to people, but I certainly will make sure that that information is reinforced.
Edmonton Meadowlark, and if there's time, Vermilion Viking.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Treasurer. This government has not followed the advice of members of the Legislative Assembly and the Auditor General about important financial reporting procedures. The case in point is the way in which the province accounts for its $5.4 billion unfunded pension liability. To the Treasurer, why does he continue to record this $5.4 billion unfunded liability in an obscure footnote to the province's balance sheet rather than fully disclosing it as has been directed by the Auditor General?
Mr. Speaker, we're following the normal approaches to disclosure of the contingent liability, and is consistent with what we have done historically and consistent with all other provinces have done.
The Auditor General, of course, is not enamored of it. Will the Treasurer confirm that this $5.4 billion will eventually have to be paid out of general revenues because the province has set aside no assets in its pension fund to cover the liability?
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's a very misleading statement. The pension fund, in fact, is underfunded. There's no question that the gentleman is right on that point, but there are clear assets involved in that fund, and those assets are producing income which are used to pay the current charges against the fund. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, the member should be aware, before he even lit upon the problem of dealing with the unfunded liability in the pensions, this government transferred $1 billion to that fund to ensure that it would be funded for the future. In terms of time, Mr. Speaker, the present value of the future flow funds would discount sometime into about 2025.
Mr. Speaker, this is present value, and over 25 years it will be much more than $5.4 billion, believe me. Can the Treasurer tell the House why the government has not regularly set aside assets to cover these unfunded pension liabilities, because they will come out of general revenues in the future?
Well, now that's a strange fiscal plan, Mr. Speaker. We've seen it before with the Federal Liberal Party. Now we see it again here today. This inconsistency, which really provides no consistent policy approach at all to any of the issues. What they would rather do is have us take away from the current expenditures which are now provided to the Assembly, increase the deficit and put the money into some fund which will be paid in 50 or 70 years from now. That's the kind of backward thinking I see coming from that side all the time, Mr. Speaker. We have a consistent plan. It's a plan which is accepted, and we know we're going to make the commitments of the pension liabilities, and everyone knows that in the province of Alberta as well, Mr. Speaker.
What we would have the government do is simply set aside money planned for the future. It hasn't done that. What comment does the Treasurer have on the fact that in addition to this year's $3.3 billion deficit, which of course will become debt to this province, the province also has a $5.4 billion unfunded pension liability that will eventually have to be paid out of general revenues, and therefore, in many respects, this government actually has a $9 billion deficit becoming a debt?
Again, Mr. Speaker, the clear message I want to leave with the people of Alberta that is an absolute misleading statement. First of all, Mr. Speaker, the consolidated assets of this government, this is the only province with an aggregate surplus, Mr. Speaker, when you consider the savings in the Heritage Fund and the accumulated deficit in the General Revenue Fund. We have an accumulated surplus, Mr. Speaker, contrary to what the member is suggesting. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, because we are dealing with the size of the deficit, a clear direction from the citizens of Alberta, contrary to the fiscal plan given to us by the Liberal Party across the way. We are taking hold of that problem right now, Mr. Speaker, and that's the responsible fiscal plan which has been presented to this Assembly in the budget address, and the member knows very well that it receives a large endorsement of the people of Alberta. We're dealing with the problem, we have a plan, and we're moving ahead on it, Mr. Speaker.
Time for question period has expired. Might we continue this series of questions with unanimous consent? Opposed? Member for St. Albert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're well aware of just how well this provincial treasurer is handling this unfunded liability. It's growing every year. My question to the minister is this, will he recognize that he has an unfunded liability in a number of pension plans, and what is he going to do to rectify that? And let's get action. Let's not talk about defer, defer, defer. Let's take some action on it. Let's get it funded.
Has been asked, honourable member. Minister, please.
Mr. Speaker, again, the lack of understanding from the member is clear. It is a matter of choice among governments as to how they deal with this issue, and we have taken the choice of providing clear information to the users of the fund that, in fact, there is an unfunded liability which will be paid sometime in the future. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, the fund is now being addressed. As I've indicated, we have transferred $1 billion into that fund to ensure its liquidity and to ensure that the assets are in place. Moreover, the continuing contributions by all people who participate in that fund adds to its viability. Now, Mr. Speaker, what the member is saying is that the future of Alberta is at risk. Frankly, Mr. Speaker, I can't buy that. I believe that there will be a government when the obligations are due, and the government at the time will continue to make the payments as we're now doing now. If he knows of anyone, Mr. Speaker, who has not received a payment under the pension plan, I wish he'd let me know that person's name.
Supplementary, Cypress Redcliffe.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker, to the minister. I wonder if the minister would inform the Assembly of his feelings on the idea of having a notation in the statement is any better than having it hidden somewhere in the statement, at least to those of us that don't understand financial statements as well as he or the member from other members do.
Well, that's, Mr. Speaker, a very valid observation, wherein many people can see when looking at the disclosure of the public accounts, including the consolidated statements of this province, that in a footnote form the Auditor General is drawing to the attention of the reader that in fact there are some other information that should be factored into the judgment or the assessment of the accounts at the time. And one of those deals with this question of the unfunded liability for the pension plans. The member is very accurate when he suggests that in fact by showing it by footnote you are being more specific and underscoring the importance of the liability, and moreover drawing the reader's attention to it more specifically.
Time for... There was no prior notice, but if the member does, indeed.
Mr. Speaker, on a point of order, sorry, when I leaped up before I was interfering with one of my party supplementals, but I wanted to bring to the attention of the House that the only political party that was present from Alberta in signing the national energy policy was the Conservative one.
There's no point of order. Order, please, honourable member. Chair was waiting with great anticipation to hear which citation of standing orders O'Shane, Erskine May, or some other learned source was going to be quoted by the member, but honourable member for Westlock Sturgeon is becoming an author and wishes to do his own book on parliamentary procedure. Tailor-made indeed, honourable member. And I'm sure it would make rather interesting, if not very convoluted reading. Yesterday, there was indeed a matter was raised in the House, a purported point of privilege. The chair, after listening to some discussion, directed that Standing Order 15.2 would take effect, and the chair advises the House that indeed a statement was received from the member for Athabasca Lac La Biche, and the chair has had not sufficient time to peruse the issue, and so under Standing Order 15.3 takes the matter under advisement, and in all likelihood will report to the House tomorrow. Orders of the day.
I'd like to respond to the member's purported order, a point of order. Alberta didn't sign a national...
Order, please.